They saw you praying when no one answered your calls. They saw your door close, but not your spirit open. They saw your glow, then dimmed their own. They caught a glimpse of your scars. They whispered instead of helping. They thought you were weak. Then you rose. They witnessed your silence become sacred. They stare because you carry something they buried. You became light. They hid behind curtains. They saw what broke you. They missed what built you. They noticed the angels first. That's why they never sleep. You walked by, unbothered, anointed, watched. They envy your peace because it cost you your storm. They heard you cry, but felt their own shame. They watched the ashes, but ignored the rising. They saw grace hug you and turned bitter. They recorded your wounds, not your wisdom. They watched you rebuild silently. That scared them. They heard your name in the wind. Then came fear. They prayed against you. God prayed over you. They tried to curse what God already crowned. They looked for gossip, found glory. They tracked your steps, but not your surrender. They felt your light and blamed the sun. They saw your soul walk out before your body moved. They saw the oil and tried to steal the jar. They noticed your silence was louder than their words. They spy because your peace exposes their chaos. They watched your grief glow golden. They know your shadow walks with fire. They tried to study you, ended up confessing. They watched you starve and still shine. They can't forget what they felt when you wept. They saw you in the dark and still needed sunglasses. They know you're chosen. That's what unsettles them. They saw the presence following you. They heard the silence shift when you entered. They envy what they didn't earn. They saw your loneliness, not your covering. They watched the divine wrap you in gold. They heard your soul hum while breaking. They tried to figure you out and got convicted. They saw the pain, then came the thunder. They thought it was over. Then the miracle moved. They think you're fragile. Heaven calls you a gate. They spied, hoping you'd fall, watched you fly. They know you're marked. They just don't understand it. They felt your prayers through the wall. They saw God's eyes in your tears. They recorded your collapse, missed your crowning. They stare at the door you never locked, trying to decode your holiness. They wanted your weakness, got your warning. They saw your grief baptize the walls. They kept watching. Then the wind started whispering your name. They hid behind blinds, but couldn't block the glory. They saw your shadow dancing with something divine. They wanted dirt, found destiny. They noticed you started glowing right after the breakdown. They saw you cry, and the lights flickered. They watched the unexplainable happen in your hallway. They watched too long and started dreaming about you. They saw you broken and mistaken it for being reborn. They witnessed grace choose you. They kept watching and forgot their own path. They saw you heal but couldn't stomach the cost. They stared long enough to start repenting. They wanted access. They got exposed. They mistook your silence for shame. They didn't know your name rang in heaven. They watched you bury yourself, then saw God raise you. They saw the oil fall from your eyelids. They said nothing but felt everything. They never meant to watch that long. They keep trying to unsee the divine in you. They saw your yes to God and trembled. They felt their own spirit shake when you passed. They watched you love what nearly killed you. They watched the air change when you prayed. They felt the presence, couldn't explain the peace. They saw your obedience, and it ruined their rebellion. They said nothing, but they've been marked. They saw you touch the edge of something eternal. They saw your name etched in something invisible. They call it spying, but it's witness. They saw a holiness crawl out of your ache. They stared too long, and their soul opened. They saw angels rest at your doorstep. They saw the grief grow wings. They're not watching anymore. They're afraid. They peeked through curtains and got conviction. They saw a miracle look like you. They watched your ruin and missed your resurrection. They kept records. God kept promises. They noticed your light isn't man-made. They watched your pain bloom like prophecy. They tried to imitate what they couldn't carry. They saw you and finally feared God. They watched you die to your old self. They saw the fire but not the altar. They watched your silence become scripture. They couldn't unhear the sound your spirit made. They saw you argue with heaven and lose beautifully. They watched your trauma become testimony. They caught your shadow talking to angels. They saw you fall on your face and rise with wings. They saw you wrestle in the dark. They saw your limp become legacy. They watched, but still missed the moment heaven nodded. They heard the cracking, but not the crowning. They wanted to mock until they met your glow. They spied and found their soul startled. They tried to label you. God erased it. They kept asking questions. Your life kept answering. They saw your ache outlive their judgment. They saw you shatter in slow motion, then bloom. They watched your yes to God change the atmosphere. They thought they caught you. They got caught. They watched your boundaries become burning bushes. They're still haunted by your holiness. They caught the scent of surrender. They watched you starve every idol. They saw the storm, but not the stillness inside you. They stared and started to shake. They never meant to see your miracle. They eavesdropped on a divine covenant. They saw your yes cost everything. They thought you were done. Then glory came in. They spied on survival, but witnessed resurrection. They saw your lamp stay lit. They thought your silence meant defeat. They watched you sleep and heard a song. They saw you disappear into prayer. They watched your breath turn into battle. They saw heaven kneel beside your grief. They tried to name it, but it was too sacred. They looked through glass. You walked with fire. They saw you hurt and felt their lies burn. They saw you wait and the sky responded. They wanted power. You became presence. They saw your door, not your destiny. They heard your collapse and felt conviction. They knew you changed when the lights flickered. They watched your breaking become an altar. They saw your rage melt into reverence. They knew you were chosen by how the silence bowed. They heard heaven say your name. They saw love meet you in the hallway. They've seen too much now. They'll never be the same.